Our guests for this evening are Mr. Alex Ruff, our incumbent with the Conservative Party of Canada, the Michelle Lawrence of the Green Party, and we have Anne-Marie Watson, Liberal Party of Canada, Christopher Neudorf, New Democratic Party of Canada, Anna-Marie Fosbrook, People's Party of Canada, and our independent, Mr. Reima Kaikkonen. This evening, I just wanted to let everyone know that we are following the proper COVID protocols. We are 6 feet apart. Everyone is allowed to take off their masks in this building. We only have the amount of people in the room that we could possibly have. So just so everyone is aware that if you're not comfortable without your mask, by all means, you could put that on. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes for opening remarks, and you'll be given 90 seconds for closing remarks. And we have some questions that are 9 minutes that we're going to ask each and every one of you the same question. A sign will be held up letting you know that you have 30 seconds left, and then when it's up, you'll have a stop sign, and you've all seen that sign. Our moderator tonight is Mr. Trent Gow. He will be asking each candidate the questions, and if you need clarification, by all means, he could repeat that for you. Thank you to all who have joined us. An email will be on the bottom of the screen, so that if anyone out there has any questions you would like to submit to us, you could, the email says info@oschamber.com, so by all means send them. We will be monitoring those because we ask that you be respectful and you don't send anything that would be hurtful or harmful to our candidates at this evening. So I'm going to leave it now to Mr. Trent Gow.
Thank you, Diane. The first thing I'd like to do is to thank each of you for your candidacy. It's part of democracy. It's what makes it work, and each of you are putting your heart and soul into this, and as one constituent, I greatly appreciate. So thank you very much. The other thing to say, and I don't think that this will be an issue, but please be respectful of each other. Don't speak over and don't speak out of turn. Everyone will have their opportunity, and that way answers can be clear. So with those short remarks, I would like to start the questions, and I'm going to start with Anna-Marie Fosbrook. The first set of questions will be in last name alphabetical order, and then I'll switch them around so people have different positioning in questions. My first question is to Anna-Marie Fosbrook, and the second person will be Mr. Kaikkonen. I'm sorry?
Opening statements.
Yes, I apologize. So opening statements. First statement will be by Anna-Marie Fosbrook.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I just want to make sure I got my microphone at the right spot. All good? Okay. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. And my opening statement, I want to start with the importance of this election. I think that most of us recognize that this is a very important election in the history of our country. I've received a great deal of feedback, as I'm sure the other candidates have as well, with concerns about people's rights and freedoms and a whole variety of things that have come to light in the last 18 months. So we're certainly going to have some discussions about specific policies, and well, we should. But I just want to make clear that underlying everything that we talk about is the rights and freedoms of Canadians. And that's going to be my focus. When I think about the impacts of government on our people, I think in terms of social impacts, everything that everybody's lived through in the last 18 months has shown us the gaps in our society that people fall through and remain down. So it's very concerning. I just want to say that it's a good time for us to have these discussions. And I'm looking forward to elaborating at future opportunities, knowing that it is a limited opportunity for discussion tonight. So I invite people to continue to have those conversations with me. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker will be Mr. Kaikkonen.
Thank you. Just a few words about myself. I'm a family man with 7 children and 17 grandchildren. Farmer, businessman, and pastor. My platform is faith, life, freedom, liberty, and opportunity. I believe these are the ingredients that release us the best in the nation. I'm running because I believe the good folks of Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound need a real choice. Everyone recognizes that the current government is broken. There's a serious disconnect between those who govern and the people who elected them. The last 20 months have exposed government hypocrisy, corruption, and ethical violations of constitutional rights and freedoms. It's time to end the lockdowns. In fact, if elected, I would immediately declare Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound the passport-free, COVID passport-free sanctuary. Restore rights and freedoms of every citizen and elect candidates who oppose government overreach, censorship, and dictator-like tactics upon the people. It's time for the right to sink in ship by restoring the foundational Judeo-Christian principles country was founded upon. So please stand with me in this restoring the covenant that is for the people, by the people, under the supremacy of God and rule of law. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lawrence?
Thank you. I'm Michelle Lawrence. I am the Green Party candidate. I want to start by saying that the area of this riding that we're seeking to represent here, Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound, is similar to the bounds of a treaty written in 1836, which promised that this land be protected for the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation forever from the encroachments of the whites, and that's a quote. The treaty claim was brought to the court in 2019 and has gone through its first stage this summer. The judges ruled that revoking the bounds of this treaty in the place of reserves in 1854 was unjust. In its next stage, there will be remedies. I start this way because we are all going to weigh in on climate change today, and it is Indigenous peoples that have been the land defenders this whole time, sticking up for the treatment of the environment that we all depend on. As far as I know, the 6 of us here seeking to be representatives of this area are all immigrants or settlers or descendants of immigrants and settlers. We must turn to the Indigenous peoples of this land when we create solutions to climate change. Many of us are feeling overwhelmed by the information, injustice that is now being unveiled, and it's Indigenous people included and climate change included. We have to find our window of tolerance to act on these issues. I have chosen to show up because you need to hear a younger person's view on these issues, on the future we have yet to face. I believe that the Green Party's platform is adaptable, equitable, and of course, a champion of the environment. Caring about the environment used to be a niche characteristic for a federal party, but is now a necessity. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Neudorf?
My name is Christopher Neudorf. I am the NDP candidate for this election. And, folks ask me a lot, why did I do this? After I'm done assuring them it's because I'm not crazy, it's because I believe in something. I believe in this community. I believe in this country. I believe in us. I think we're facing extraordinary crises right now. We're facing a climate crisis that is becoming inignorable. We're facing an inequality crisis, and it was a crisis before COVID-19. We are facing an affordability and housing crisis that is out of control. The truth is, after 50 years of constant slashes to public services in order to cut taxes for the wealthy, we've let people down. Canadians deserve a new deal. which represents working people. We deserve to have a wealth system, a wealth tax, which reflects that the burden of responsibility for paying taxes should not be on the lowest income Canadians. We deserve access to affordable housing. We deserve universal pharmacare. Our seniors should not be products for a for-profit long-term care system, which is cutting support for them at increasingly unaffordable prices for working families. Working families shouldn't have to choose if they can give their children childcare and if they can give their parents the care and dignity they need. Those are our human rights. We need a new deal that works with our Indigenous friends to create actual new climate structures and new jobs that will save the environment. We're often told we have to choose between the environment and our economic future. We don't. We owe it to our children and our children's children to give them both. And we can if we come together, if we make the wealthiest finally pay their fair share and we do our job. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Neudorf. Mr. Ruff?
Thanks. First off, I just want to say thank you to all the chambers and all the listeners for partaking in our democratic process, for hosting tonight. I think this is the best way, all of us, whoever's successful next week, to represent us, represent the riding, is to get the feedback, partake in the democratic process. For those listeners or viewers out there that don't know who I am, I have been the incumbent member of Parliament, a privilege and an honor that I hold to the highest esteem for the last 2 years. I grew up on a farm in Tara, the eldest of 5 boys, on a small hobby farm really, but joined the military right out of high school, spent 25 and a half years in the military, retired as a colonel in 2019, came straight out of Iraq and jumped into federal politics. So kind of jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire to some extent. But it's been a privilege. I feel it's been an interesting challenge for sure for the last 2 years. Obviously, the pandemic has thrown a wrench into a lot of the new class of 2019 that were fortunate enough to be elected. But I stood up right off the get-go and represented our farmers, our small business, the disabled, our veterans, and our seniors. I was happy to second and help get Emancipation Day, something important here for Owen Sound area and our greater region, recognized as a national day. We pushed back, myself and a number of colleagues, against the current government's cut to the visually impaired, and were successful in reversing that small cut of really only $1 million a year, which is a lot of money for a lot of us. However, when they're spending $424 million a day right now, you'd think you could find $1 million for our disabled. But our Conservative Party has a platform. We're the only party with a solid plan with 5 key pillars to recover the 1 million jobs lost, to get the economy back under balance, restore accountability in Ottawa, take care of health care, and ultimately make sure we're prepared for a future pandemic. Looking forward to the debate.
Thank you. Ms. Watson?
Thank you. Good evening. Thanks for the opportunity and for coordinating this event. I'm Anne-Marie Watson, your Liberal candidate for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound. I graduated from the University of Guelph in political science while farming and raising 2 children. I moved to West Grey in 1997, where I still live and work on the family beef farm with my husband. I've worked for several nonprofits in Greater Bruce over the past 25 years. I've been the executive director of the Durham Hospital Foundation for 8 of those years. I have a broad background with the social issues in this region. I've also been involved with physician recruitment and know firsthand the difficulties of attracting doctors, nurses, nurse practitioners to this area. The Liberal Party has had people's backs throughout this pandemic, supporting them with health care, income, and business supports. A re-elected Liberal government will finish the fight against COVID, introduce affordable and accessible childcare so that women can go back to work, fight climate change, and grow the economy. On a personal note, I am committed to creating an environment where business and the economy can thrive in Grey and Bruce, to ensuring health care to all of our people, standing up for agriculture and the environment, and to helping Canadians get into their own homes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll start now with the questions. I almost started there before, but we'll start now. Just, Mr. Neudorf, just to know, you're going to be asked the first responder on this question. This federal election is taking place less than 2 years from the last one. Is this timing beneficial for the residents of Bruce Grey?
To be blunt, I don't really think it is. In the national debate, Jagmeet Singh said that this was a selfie election for Mr. Trudeau, and I think it is. The reality is, as my colleague indicated, the Liberals have worked to support Canadians, but it's because of NDP pressure. The CERB program that was put into place was because of NDP pressure. $2,000 a month, 75% wage subsidy, that was us. And the reality is, by working with the NDP, the Liberals could continue to fight COVID and maintain this country without risking an election during a global pandemic. This is about gaining a majority government. I think it's wrong. I think it was a foolish thing to do. I think it was an egotistical thing to do. And I don't think we should be doing this. But since we are here, let us take this moment to see how we can turn this crisis into an opportunity. And we can, if we work together, and if we bring about a Green New Deal, and if we focus back on putting money back into the community. Let's use this election as a chance to make our voices heard.
Thank you. The next person I will ask is Mr. Ruff, but just to let you know that Ms. Watson will be after Mr. Ruff. So, Mr. Ruff.
Thanks so much, Trent. So the short answer is it absolutely is the wrong time to have an election. I totally agree with the previous speaker, my NDP candidate, that this is all about Justin Trudeau's desire for a majority government and unwillingness to work collaboratively with the other parties. I'd correct him as well, though, that the Conservative Party was actually right off the get-go pushing for the increase in the wage subsidy as well. We recognize right off the get-go. But the bottom line is, as much as I dislike a number of the policies that this current Liberal government's been putting forward over the last couple of years, we were all elected, 4-year mandates, the normal time frame. We're in a pandemic, and we even all voted, including Mr. Trudeau and the Liberal Party, not to have an election while the pandemic was going on. Yet, lo and behold, here we are having an election.
Thank you. Ms. Watson? And after that, it will be Ms. Fosbrook. But Ms. Watson?
So I'd like to just adjust my response a little bit, if I may, and point out to my esteemed colleagues at this point that I don't know if there's ever a perfect time to have an election, but in all of the discussions that I've heard involving Justin Trudeau, never was the word majority used. What we have heard is that we wanted an opportunity to go to the people and ask for their support and ask if we're in the right direction. So Canadians right now are going through a challenge of a lifetime, if not a century, over the past 18 months. The Liberal government reacted swiftly to protect Canadians' health and support them in extremely difficult times, and now we want to go forward and ask the Canadian public, are we on the right track? Ask them for their support, ask them for their mandate. And I just do want to point out that, well, no, I'm going to skip that one. So as a reminder, the Conservatives voted against the budget in April 2021, hoping to force a non-confidence vote, which would have caused an election to be called. Alex Ruff himself voted against the budget along with his party on April 26th. The NDP voted with the Liberals, allowing the government to keep working for Canadians. Why would it have been acceptable then and it's not acceptable today?
Thank you. Ms. Fosbrook?
Thank you very much for the question. I think this is a great time to have an election. I think we've reached a pressure cooker moment where Canadians are clamoring for the opportunity to say, this is what we really want. Now, I'll grant you the compressed time within which this election is taking place, I take issue with. Like, I have my voter card here, and it says, vote by mail, apply by Tuesday, September 14th. That's today. If you're only applying today, how does that play out to get results on the 20th? That's just an observation. I take exception to the mandate, the use of the word mandate in the context of somebody gets elected and therefore I have a mandate. Well, I'm not so sure that the mandate is being interpreted the way it truly should. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kaikkonen?
Thank you. I estimate, and I heard the estimation cost of this election is about 600 million. So indeed, I pray it's going to be an opportunity for the nation to find a new footing, if not even a new beginning, and a better direction. And my question is to every citizen, what are the policies that the current government is pursuing if current situation where the smaller parties are willing to work very well with this government, they are running actually, in a sense, majority government. So what is coming down the pipe that even the partners of this government will not accept, and they are looking for the majority mandate? So this is a little bit scary thought. Think about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I just remind candidates that so people can hear you, please speak up close to the mic and speak a bit louder. That way it will clearly communicate. Thank you. So we're into the second question. Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me.
I'll try not to be too repetitive. I know that an election is maybe always a difficult time, and this one certainly is a worry, the cost of the election, but it is a chance to reflect on values that may have changed over this crisis, this pandemic. And certainly in my personal life, there has been a reflection on what is most important and where we need to go forward after this crisis. Part of that is bringing everyone together, and I see so much division over the past few years, and we really need to take this opportunity, this election, to have people participate in our democracy, have their voice heard, and recover in a new way. We really hope that we can recover with a green recovery and advanced research and technology that will improve our environment in the long run. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The second question is going to address child care support, and the first person to answer on this will be Ms. Fosbrook. And it relates to the role of the federal government in providing child care for Canadian families. Do you support a $10 a day universal health care system or some form of refundable tax credit? Is one approach or the other more helpful to families in Bruce-Grey? So it's really the $10 or the tax credit, or anything else you might want to say.
Well, thank you for the question. I prefer to rephrase the question and just look at child care fundamentally. What I'm hearing about right now is people are very concerned about their parental rights. And you can talk about child care, and certainly I'm in support of making sure that families have what they need. But right now, we have people who are quite concerned with their diminishing parental rights, and I just don't want to see that overlooked. So I'm going to take the opportunity to make sure I make that point. I would also say that we need to take a look at the greater impact of our financial system. You know, we got from one individual could support their family, and now you need, two people working 3.5 jobs to support one child. So it needs some more review. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kaikkonen.
I'm somewhat surprised that this Jesus Bennett candidate needs to remind even the mainline parties that this is predominantly federal, provincial government's issue, not federal government's issue. There's a clear division by the North American law that constitutes clearly what's between provinces and governments. But I certainly believe parents are the primary caretakers, and as the economy will improve, I'm sure people will find solutions and hopefully parents, grandparents have an opportunity to care for their children, and that's the way it should be. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lawrence? I didn't forget you this time.
A unique response to the issue of childcare is the Green Party's proposal for guaranteed livable income, and that will not only support families and caregivers to provide childcare and pay for childcare, but help buffer job losses created by automation, help people expand their education and get out into the job market. So the Liberals have created a poverty reduction strategy, and it has increased funding for low-income families and increased the child care benefits. And they now propose the $10 a day daycare, but beyond all those tiny programs, the Green Party wants this full package where we can support low-income families with cash payments, and they can choose whether they want childcare or to have a well-funded home caregiving situation.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ruff?
Thanks again. So, yeah, we absolutely believe that the federal government can support and work in collaboration with the provinces to help hardworking families with their child care. So what we're proposing is increasing funding by converting the current child care expense deduction into a refundable tax credit, covering up to 75% of the cost of child care for lower income families. It's the lower income families that are going to benefit the most from this. Currently, right now, a family that's making less than $30,000 can claim a total of $1,200. Under our plan, they'll get up to $6,000. The median wage in this in Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound is just under $70,000, and for a family that's making an income of $80,000, they'd be able to claim up to $4,800. So this is a program that can be implemented immediately, unlike the child care spaces that the government's currently promising, that they've been promising since 1993, yet they've yet to deliver.
Thank you. Ms. Watson?
Affordable and accessible childcare is one of the Liberals' key issues in the election platform. Our plan will deliver $10 a day childcare within 5 years or less. We're going to build 250,000 new high-quality childcare spaces and hire 40,000 more ECEs. Just as a note, when mothers re-enter the workforce, it will add 1.2% GDP to the 1.2% to the GDP and create 250,000 jobs. I'd like to read something, if I may, to make sure it's accurate. On September 10th, Gordon Cleveland of Policy Options, which is a nonpartisan publication, compared all the parties' childcare plans, and he says, the Liberals have a far better plan for making childcare affordable, while the Conservatives' tax credit would only have a minor effect on affordability. Even the NDP under Jagmeet Singh supports this direction. Under the Conservative plan, 30% or more of after-tax income would be required to pay for childcare, while under the Liberal plan, families would spend just less than 5% of after-tax income on childcare. Affordable, high-quality childcare has the potential to add 240,000 workers to the Canadian workforce. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Newdorf?
So the NDP has been consistently and strongly in favor of a universal childcare program at $10 a day. And like the Liberals, we agree that this needs to come with not only hiring more ECEs, but where we go a step further is we want to increase their pay significantly. ECEs are professional workers. I used to be an ECE myself. I used to work with ECEs. I know how hard these people work. They are understaffed and they are underpaid. Now, the tax credit suggested by the Conservatives simply isn't going to work because it is essentially paying back for people money that they have to spend up front on childcare. This is like a bank lending you money when you're no longer in debt. They have to have the money up front to pay for the child care. They can't wait till tax season to get that back. So the program simply won't work. I would love to work with the Liberals to make this happen, just like I would have loved for them to have done so in 1993. And so I might have enjoyed it myself. The fact is, it's been promised every election, and it hasn't happened despite NDP working to achieve that. We can do it and make ECE's lives better and better paid for and give kids the chance to experience child care. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have I covered everyone? Thank you very much. Then I'm going to move on to another question relating to housing. What would your party do, or what would you do, to make rental housing and home ownership home ownership more accessible and affordable for young families, low-income residents, and seniors in Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound. And I'm going to start with Ms. Watson.
Thank you. Well, we've all seen the cost of houses skyrocket over the past 18 months. Many young Canadians have all but given up on their dream of ever having home ownership. Well, the Liberals have that as one of the key elements of their platform as well. We want to help young people save and be able to purchase their own first home. We're going to commit $1 billion in loan and grants in rent-to-own programs. We're going to introduce a tax-free home savings account to help young people save up to $40,000 for their down payment. We're going to build more affordable housing. We'll invest $4 billion in a new housing accelerator fund. We'll work with Indigenous groups to address their housing crisis. No one in Canada should live in substandard housing. We'll strategize with Indigenous partners. We'll also work to end homelessness by working with committees and communities to solve the chronic homelessness and prevention and reduction problems. The Liberal Housing Plan will help 100,000 people buy their own home, build more than 20,000 affordable housing units, and work with communities to end chronic housing.
Thank you. Ms. Lawrence, housing.
The housing and rental market is inaccessible to many desperately in need of housing. Rising prices in the past couple of years have not only pushed first-time home buyers out of the market, but also renters. Let's remember that 1 in 3 Canadians is a renter, and they are becoming much more subordinate to landlords and property investors under the system we have. The Green Party is against homeowners' grants as a solution to the housing crisis because it directly puts more pressure on the market. And this makes it counterproductive. When people have more money to buy a house, more people are demanding houses, and that does not quite fix the system. It only drives the prices up. The Green Party would like to finance nonprofit and cooperative rental housing to have better, safer, energy-efficient building standards, and would like to try some other more creative options to manage the housing crisis for home ownership. Two of those options are the capital gains tax, which reduces speculation, and the other is removing blind bidding. Thank you.
Mr. Ruff.
Thanks. So, a great question. This is a question I've been hearing from literally the first day I jumped into politics. Affordable housing, in particular in Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound, is tough, and including rent. And this really comes down to simple economics, supply and demand. There's just not enough housing and rental places for anybody in the area, in particular our youth and our seniors. So what we're committed to doing with a Conservative government is getting 1 million houses built within the next 3 years. That'll dramatically increase supply by freeing up, and we're doing this a large part in some of the urban centers by freeing up the federal real estate, 37,000 buildings there, and if we free up 15% of that, that's going to give a lot more supply available and keep the urban sprawl down. As well, we're going to ban foreign ownership and into the money laundering that's going along in some of our main centers. And the other idea I'd throw out there that I've been talking with local developers about is maybe putting some sort of plan in place where when a developer wants to build housing, that 25% of that could be separated for affordable housing.
Thank you. Mr. Neudorf.
Thank you. Both my Liberal and Conservative colleagues have spoken about building houses, but what they haven't spoken about is affordable houses. The Liberals are opposing a $1 billion subsidy to build more houses. We propose $14 billion. Our purpose is to build 500,000 affordable homes within the next 10 years, half of which will be in the next 5. This is the key difference. We are not building this for wealthy Canadians. We are not building these for higher-income Canadians. These are for low-income Canadians. These are to give Canadians, through co-op rental opportunities, an eco-friendly opportunity to be able to rent at a reasonable rate. This will force speculative landlords to drive down their rental costs to compete with this superior option. And in doing so, we can force this ridiculous spiral downward. To close, I would like to mention that it was the Liberals that pulled out funding for building homes in the 1990s under Paul Martin, and the Conservatives failed to pick it up. We applaud them for coming back on the right side of this issue, but only the NDP has been advocating for it.
Thank you. Ms. Fosbrook.
Thank you for the question. So I should interject at this point that, there's a number of platform points that are available for anybody to look at, and certainly there's no time to go into all of them. But my recurring theme is going to be, again, our financial system and this habit we have of printing money from nothing and thinking that it has no impact. The impact is huge. Look at inflation. And I go back to the fact that, decades ago, people could afford a home and have a family without everybody working 2 jobs and still not making ends meet. So there are means to address these things other than subsidies that distort the housing market. And I think that, some of those are worth exploring rather than just continuing to subsidize thinking that we're going to catch up. Thank you. I see this.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kaikkonen, please speak closer to your mic.
Oh, yes,
Thank
yes.
Just want people to hear you.
Right, yes. Rising housing costs are not only Canadian problem and not only caused by only Canadian financial system. It's the worldwide situation. All in the industrialized nations are struggling with a similar problem. It is basically caused by unusually, artificially low borrowing costs. And when that reverses, rest assured, Mr. Market will start correcting the situation. When the interest rates go higher, and they will, whether Canadians want it or not, that will start causing the market prices to come down. It always has done that. So my advice to my constituents and Canada is hang tight. Mr. Market will actually provide the answer to you. It won't be pretty though, but it'll be an answer that you can possibly afford your house sooner than later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next subject area is climate change. And the question is, what are your policies on climate change? How can they be effective? And what impact particularly will they have locally? And I'm going to start with Mr. Neudorf.
Thank you. There's a lot to talk about here, so I'll do my best to say it all. First off, I want to talk about the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. The reality is this has finally been recognized by Canada thanks to pressure by the NDP. And what it means is we need to start bringing Indigenous communities into the discussions on how to combat climate change. Indigenous people live for millennia in perfect harmony with nature. We need to work with them and learn from them. And we need to give them the power to have a voice when our decisions like the Trans Mountain Pipeline are going to significantly impact their lives. We also want a Green New Deal. 300,000 new jobs to start, high-paying jobs in the green, white, and blue-collar sectors to reduce our emissions to 0% electrical production emissions by 2040, reduce them by 50% overall carbon emissions by 2030. This starts with ending the hundreds of billion-dollar subsidies the Liberals send every year to oil and gas and putting it towards green R&D. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Fosbrook?
Thank you. So climate change seems to be one of those topics where there's the narrative that we're told repetitively, and then there's what some people truly believe. I'm not convinced that we have an emergency that warrants a state of emergency. What I think we have is a situation where people are becoming increasingly aware that we can all be more responsible. What I would like to see is more at-home domestic care for our country and less dollars going to global organizations thinking that they're going to change our weather.
Thank you. Mr. Ruff?
Thanks. So we all must recognize the reality of climate change and how it's affecting our ecosystems, hurting our communities, and damaging our infrastructure. And this is why our Conservative Party brought forth in April a serious environmental plan. That plan that was verified by independent Navius, a climate change modeler that does it for the federal governments and the provinces, and they've stated clearly that our plan is comparable for emission reductions to the Liberal plan without the same economic damage and loss of jobs across the country. Fundamental to our plan is actually getting transparency for everybody's carbon footprint, which I think is important for rural Canadians. As well, green technology. You asked about some stuff local. We have innovative green technology across Canada, and we have it here in Owen Sound with Hydrogen Optimized, a corporation that can bring hundreds of jobs to our local economy. So I'm looking forward to seeing it move forward.
Thank you. Mr. Kaikkonen.
Thank you. I believe the most important climate change has to happen in a spiritual realm. It's amazing what happens to a person's life when he finds the firm ground believing in Jesus. He starts knowing why he's here, what the purpose is here, where he's heading. He spins wheels less. Everything kind of settles in the life. The money goes further in the family, and that is a known fact. I've seen that, experienced that. I believe that's a good start. And technologies right now are on the way that will provide solution. Electric cars are on the way, whether there's any subsidies or not. It's coming. And Canada is not one of the biggest problems on that front. So as a candidate, I would propose that this nation starts honoring the principles of godliness. Thank you.
Ms. Lawrence.
Canada has the opportunity of a lifetime to invest in a post-pandemic green recovery with actionable measures to cut emissions. A green recovery will simultaneously create the jobs we need, secure our economic future, strengthen our social safety net, and help our country do its fair share to combat the climate emergency. The Green Party proposes a 60% reduction in emissions from 2005 levels by 2030 with clear enforceable yearly targets. All of the other parties have set reduction targets that are lower than this, and they're not on track with the Paris Climate Agreement and will not meet our fair share of reduction globally. I also want to make note that earlier this year at the Conservative Party convention, perhaps where they proposed this policy, 54% of voting delegates voted against a motion that would include the following phrases in the party policy: "We recognize that climate change is real and the Conservative Party is willing to act."
Thank you. Sorry, thank you. Ms. Watson.
Thank you. Let there be no doubt, climate change is real, and it's an emergency. We saw wildfires in the west, and drought hitting the prairies, and crazy heat waves here across this part of eastern Canada. The Liberals have a bold plan to address this, create more jobs, support cleaner communities, and cut pollution. We will create clean jobs in the green tech and energy sector and make sure no one's left behind. We're going to work with our Indigenous partners to create more of these solutions. We'll help industries create and adapt to clean technologies, and I'd like to point out to Mr. Ruff that the Hydrogen Optimized was funded to $4.3 million by the Liberal government. We'll provide a $5,000 rebate on buying a new zero-emission car, create 50,000 more charging stations, and by 2035, all cars sold in Canada will be zero-emission. We will eliminate subsidies for fossil fuels in 2 years instead of 4. We're going to work with agriculture because they're part of the solution and not part of the problem. And we will meet our shared goal of net zero emissions by 2050.
Thank you. We're moving on to another area, and Ms. Lawrence will be starting. Labor shortage. What is your plan to recruit the labor and skills that are so short in certain areas in our region?
The Green Party will start by supporting the workers and consumers in our society to be at their best, and that means continuing guaranteed livable income, or beginning that to replace the support programs that we have started in the pandemic. Beyond that, there's a huge investment that can be made in green recovery, starting with increasing funding for disaster mitigation and adaptation fund. funding mitigation activities, stormwater systems, restoration of wetlands, shorelines, and natural infrastructure, and developing transdisciplinary partnerships with governmental, nonprofit organizations, academic institutions, and industry to invest in research and necessary equipment. This is our prime strategy, is working towards a green recovery, and there's so many investments in other areas like the oil and gas industry that can be put into this kind of recovery. Thanks.
Mr. Neudorf.
We believe that a universal income, basic income, is critical, but that cannot come before critical labor reform. There are a number of labor shortages in our counties, and it's not just recent. We have been suffering a brain drain for years. Our Green New Deal will bring people back who have had to leave our counties to use their professional accreditations. We need engineers. We need scientists. We need high skills majors. We need all of these people to build zero emission green energy production here. We can save the environment and bring young skilled workers back to our counties. We also need to talk minimum wage. Anything less than $18 right now in Bruce-Grey is simply not enough to live. That's why we support an immediate $15 and soon to $20 federal minimum wage. We also support cost of living adjustment, which will bring that immediate amount up further. It is simply not responsible to set a minimum wage without adjusting for inflation, which is why we want COLA. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kaikkonen.
Thank you. I hear that labor shortage is actually a real problem in this area. Small business and medium-sized business have difficulty finding people who fill the positions. And that is a very grievous thing. The nation at its best is when everyone is all day long thinking how they can serve their fellow man so that the fellow man will lay down his hard-earned money to buy the services and goods. That's the basis of free market economies, and the federal government's one task is to provide that environment where the people desire to go and serve in the places of service rather than lean back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Fosbrook.
Thank you. So, on the one hand, we have a shortage, and on the other hand, we have this situation where we have employers, and there's levels of government that are some of the largest employers around. And when we segment work into part-time work with no benefits, that doesn't help people. And I also don't think it helps when, again, we have a financial system where, we're taxing people far more than we, I think, should and need to. I think government's a little too big and bloated. And if we were to not tax people as much and they had a little bit more take-home pay and didn't feel like they had to run to the city to make the higher wage, perhaps they might stay local. I think ultimately, as we go through this whole pandemic business, we've come to learn that restrictions on businesses by government don't lead to prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Watson.
Thank you. Well, I've heard from businesses and farmers as well that they can't find people to work. I've seen the help wanted signs just as you have. Many people are blaming CERB for the problem, saying if the government would just cancel the program, then people would get back to work. Well, I've done the math, and on a 40-hour-a-week job, CERB is paying them a whopping $12.50 an hour. Nobody's getting rich. But what CERB does do is it ensures parents that can pay their rent and feed their families. It allows mothers to stay home with their children rather than spend their entire check on childcare. It gives them the choice of not returning to a job where they feel unsafe. When COVID hit and businesses closed, employees started their own businesses, changed careers, and returned to school. That doesn't solve the problem. So we will create $10 a day childcare so mothers can return to work. Welcome temporary workers to Canada to make it easy and make it easier for them to apply for permanent residency. We'll welcome 2,000 skilled refugees to fill labor shortages in areas and sectors such as healthcare. improve foreign credential recognition, make it easier for workers to relocate, train workers for green jobs, and welcome diverse Canadians into the skilled labor.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Ruff?
I'll try to spit out 5 key things that we're going to do to try to address the labor shortage that is right across all sectors. We're going to double the apprenticeship job creation tax credit for the next 3 years. We're going to invest $250 million over 2 years to create a Canada Job Training Fund that will specifically help laid-off workers get immediate access to training, reach out to traditionally underrepresented groups, support the talent needs of small businesses, and otherwise help workers get the training they need, especially focused on those areas of shortages of skilled workers. Number 3, we'll create the Working Canadian Training Loan to provide low interest rates of up to $10,000 to people who want to upgrade their skills. 4th, specifically important in our area with farming, we're going to develop a long-term strategy to extract skilled workers to the meat processing sector. Currently, there's a 30,000 worker deficit across the country that's putting our supply chains at risk. And finally, we're going to work through a credential task force to make sure we can bring in skilled labor from around the world into our area and across this country quickly and efficiently.
Thank you. Next question relates to Indigenous people in this area. I'm going to start, Mr. Kaikkonen, with you, and then the others. So question 6, what would you do to ensure that the Indigenous people of this area have fair access to basic services, including clean water, quality education, traditional hunting and fishing rights, respect, and reconciliation? What would you do?
Thank you. Just like to make an observation and point out the First Nations budget is one of the second largest budgets in the country, right next to the military budget. I don't believe that the more monies can actually resolve the matters, but redirecting, reallocating the monies that already are used for that purpose to make sure that indeed the First Nations will have clean water and housing. And I believe we should just find healing with one another. And Jesus goes long ways when he says in the Lord's Prayer, forgive as we have been forgiven ourselves. And that's a forgiveness by decision, not by feeling. Jesus demonstrated that, and I believe we can copy him safely and find way forward. And this we had to do in Jesus' name. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Watson.
Thank you. The discovery of unmarked graves at residential schools shocked Canadians. Many of us who knew little about the schools or abuses until fairly recently. With almost 6,000 bodies already discovered, mothers especially are gutted that such a thing can and did happen. Canada's history has been whitewashed to hide the ugly parts, and that's just not acceptable. So I support the Liberal government's plan to make this part of the curriculum so we don't have this ever another generation that doesn't know. The most important part of our Indigenous policies is the full participation of the First Nations people themselves. Their voice must be present and their rights must be ensured. Assembly of First Nations National Chief Roseanne Archibald unveiled her organization's top 5 requests, putting a commitment to continue on the path of truth and reconciliation at the top, followed by climate change, economic growth, First Nations jurisdiction, and strengthening of First Nations. And she acknowledged the Liberals had accomplished more in the past 6 years than any other party in history. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Fosbrook.
Thank you, sir. I would characterize Indigenous policies as disingenuous to date. I don't believe the discovery of the horrific past in these residential schools was an epiphany. I had First Nations people telling me about that in 2011, pointing to where the bodies were buried. And rest assured, they weren't just telling me. I'm going to revisit again parental rights and children. We're still violating parental rights, and we're still disadvantaging children. It shouldn't be a crime to be poor. And I think what Indigenous people need and want is the same thing that everybody else wants: equal, fair, respect. If you endeavor to give them that, everything else will fall into place.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Lawrence.
The Green Party implores that First Nations get proper funding to do everything they need in their communities. Based on a council meeting in Neashinigming in June 2021, the councillors identified training, education, and sustainable employment as priorities for the community. They started an economic development corporation called Nawash Investments, providing grants to small businesses. This is an example to say that there are needs, demands, and direction there in those First Nation communities in our local riding, and we need to, as representatives working with the state of Canada, respect that self-determination and sovereignty. The band councils are the actual experts. They need to be consulted, and we have at the federal level, as potential legislators, the responsibility to be in consultation with our local First Nations so they can have the funds necessary to rebuild their sovereignty.
Thank you. Mr. Ruff.
So there's a number of things that we're putting forward. And I'd like to say, even when I first got elected 2 years ago, one of my first meetings was meeting with the two local chiefs to understand, because I think that's the most important thing. It has to be collaborative. It's got to be done in cooperation. So we believe in consulting with the First Nations and overhauling the current funding models with the goal of making it easier for them to manage that, get out of third-party management, reducing the red tape, and providing a clearer path with better incentives for them to move forward. We believe in the importance of getting drinking water resolved. The current government promised 6 years ago they were going to resolve it, and they failed to meet that deadline of March of this year. We're going to work with them to develop those approaches. We're going to develop a comprehensive plan to implement the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action 71 through 76. And we're going to make sure that all Canadians understand our tragic history when it comes to the treatment of First Nations.
Thank you. Mr. Neudorf.
Thank you. First, I would like to say that, speaking of the Ontario curriculum, I'm happy to say residential schools are in the curriculum. And I should know, I've taught it. And that's the way it ought to be. But I think we need to go further than just educating. That's the first step, not the last. Healing is going to be a multiple generations process. And it begins with recognizing the human rights of Indigenous peoples. The reality is the Human Rights Commission of Canada has determined that non-Indigenous children are receiving significantly more funding for every single issue of need. Yet it is the Indigenous children of this country who have suffered the intergenerational trauma of the residential schools. And the Liberal government has fought them in court to prevent paying equal amounts of money for Indigenous children. This discrimination must stop. Going further, we need to recognize that the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which I'm proud to say my party pushed the Liberals to recognize, that means that First Nations need to have the right to give their consent before projects in their communities, such as the TC Energy Program, as the Nawash and Saugeen have turned down here. We need to give them that right. It is their right.
Thank you. Next subject is one that's Meaford, but Georgian Bay related. Do you support the initiative by TC Energy to develop a hydroelectric pump storage plant on the federally owned shoreline of the DND Training Center in Meaford? First responder would be Mr. Ruff.
Great question. So I've heard lots of feedback over this since the first day I was elected, and even prior to that. So there's lots of concerns out there, and obviously it's something that I've been definitely supporting. A lot of the people that have raised these concerns, making sure we're getting answers from TC Energy or the Department of National Defence. Ultimately, the department, the Liberal government, decided that they'd move forward with this, but fortunately they have included in that agreement, at least that's what the minister has told me, that before that project moves forward, or before it goes through all the necessary stages, that D&D retains the right to veto it if it impacts on training or operations. But bottom line is, I'm sort of leaning to the side where the the pros don't outweigh the cons, and I'm still waiting for TC Energy to make a real clear business case on what problem they're going to solve and how this is going to help our area and all Ontario taxpayers.
Thank you. Mr. Kuikanen, what is your view on pump storage energy?
Thank you. I must admit that I'm not very familiar with this issue and not very qualified to answer. But in principle, any project like this that is not clearly understood by community cannot be just railroaded and initiated. So I would suggest that they need to find a way to engage with the community and explain it clearly whether they actually consider it beneficial. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lawrence.
I think I'm in agreement with the other two candidates here. It sounds exciting to have this this storage unit for renewable energy. Unfortunately, there are a lot of cons, and a lot of those are environmental. The return from the energy employed is estimated to be only 70%, and the reality is we have better, newer technologies at our fingertips that can be more efficient and less harmful to the environment. One of the biggest concerns is that the intake and outtake of all this water is not held to high enough environmental standards, and there's a lot of impact on the local ecosystem. It definitely needs to be reconsidered, and TC Energy needs to go through all of these environmental standards before it's approved.
Thank you. Ms. Fosbrook.
I, too, am not intimately familiar with this particular project, but I am intimately familiar with the public consultation process that I've seen and lived through, and it's sorely lacking transparency, true consultation, and ultimately a public understanding of what is the impact. So you can show me 700 pages of consultation and studies, but what people deserve to know and often don't know is what is the impact. What's the impact in the short term? What's the impact in the long term? Without everybody reading from the same page, same factual information, you're never really going to make the best decision. Now, I'm not saying that the NIMBYs should win. What I'm saying is that the facts should dominate the conversation and the outcome.
Thank you. Mr. Newdorf.
Thank you for bringing this up. It actually relates directly to my previous response. I think this is a perfect opportunity to enforce the United Nations Declaration. I think realistically, this will have a significant impact on the sovereign territory of the Nawash-Saugeen. And the Nawash and Saugeen nations should have the right to say whether or not they approve of this. We have a terrible habit in this country of forcing potentially dangerous environmental construction on Indigenous territory. The Trans Mountain Pipeline is a perfect example of this. So my position is fairly straightforward. If the Nawash and the Saugeen nations give their informed consent to proceed, then we can discuss the environmental pros and cons. If they do not give their consent, to me that ends the conversation. I would not support it in that case. It is time for us to stop colonizing the territory of these people. Thank you.
Ms. Watson.
Yes, I tend to agree with my NDP colleague here in a lot of this. So as I understand it, the TCE project has been, they're still going through the approval process. They haven't gone through all the assessments just yet, so it's actually not going ahead. There are many concerns with this project. I've been talking to people in Meaford as I'm door knocking. They don't know yet the ramifications of it, what the environmental impact is going to be. Will the water cycle be damaging? What are the results in the environment? I think that there's going to be more consultation that's required, both with community members and also our Indigenous peoples. I'm not comfortable with what I've seen and I've read so far at this time, and I think we need a little bit more information. I don't think the project is as efficient as we would like to see right now, and I don't know if the outcome of this is going to be worth the damage that it has the potential of doing to the environment.
Thank you very much. Just so you know, we're about just a little bit over halfway through. We've had an hour of very interesting answers and thoughtful considerations by each of you, so thank you very much. Just one more hour to go, and I hope the audience who enjoy this either live or later on will find it as exciting as I have. But then, I'm called a policy wonk, so I really love these discussions. Thank you. Question number 8, I call it number 8, relates to economic development. What are your policies to help small business recover from the impact of the pandemic? And we're going to start with Mr. Neudorf.
Thanks. So, first and foremost, the first thing the NDP wants to do is to continue the programs that we have put into place. This includes the CERB program to keep Canadians afloat. This also includes the 75% wage subsidy. This includes rental supports for small businesses. But it goes a lot further than that. If you really want to break down our policy, everything has to do with helping small business. The reality is, in this system, the economy only flows to people who have money in their pockets. Putting more money in people's pockets means they can spend more at small businesses, allowing those businesses to expand. This, in turn, allows them to generate more revenue. This is how the government invests money in people to increase revenue. So when we talk about taxing the wealthy and using that to pay for long-term care, we talk about creating over 1 million high-paying jobs in the industrial sector to make Canada self-reliant again. When we talk about bringing over 300,000 green energy jobs, what we're talking about is giving people good economic opportunities, putting money in their pockets, and putting that in the pocket of small business. We got you through the pandemic, and now we're going to give you a customer base.
Thank you. Mr. Ruff.
Thanks. This is really our whole Canada recovery plan in a nutshell. It's all about recovering the jobs and getting the support back for our small businesses and all sectors of our economy. So our detailed plan, especially on the jobs, is 4 major initiatives. It's the Canada Job Surge Plan, which is going to pay up to 50% of the salary of new hires for 6 months following the end of the wage subsidy. The Canada Investment Accelerator, which is going to get companies spending money and creating jobs by providing a 5% investment tax credit for any capital investment made in 2022 and 23, with the first $25,000 to be refundable for small business. Rebuilding the Main Street tax credit, which will provide a 25% tax credit for amounts up to $100,000 that Canadians personally invest in a small business over the next 2 years to get the money flowing into our small businesses and our main streets and creating jobs. And finally, our Main Street business loan, which will provide loans of up to $200,000 to help small and medium businesses in hospitality, retail, and tourism get back on their feet, with up to 25% of it being forgiven.
Ms. Lawrence.
There's often this focus on pandemic recovery on small businesses, and while I know that I support small business recovery in the short term, continuing those supports while restrictions are in place, I know that it's the individuals and families, workers and consumers that need to be supported, and we need to turn around and find out how to support those individuals across the board. And one of those ways is guaranteed livable income. So this is a direct payment to the lowest income families in our society. And it doesn't function like a tax credit where it's just a little bit when you've already spent some. It's actually reimbursing people who are at the most vulnerable in our society. And the way that will be funded is by a wealth tax. The wealthiest people globally have grown their wealth by 54% over the pandemic, and that's a few $1 trillion boost for 2,000 people. So that will change our economy if we are able to tax them.
Thank you. Ms. Watson.
In a nutshell, the Liberal plan for economic recovery is to put people back to work. Canada's already recovered 92% of the jobs that were lost during COVID, and we have a plan to add an additional 1 million jobs. We're going to help with apprenticeships and retraining and provide incentives to those that are creating green sector jobs. As I mentioned before, we will introduce $10 a day childcare, making it possible for mothers particularly to go back to work. The Liberal government extended the Canada Recovery Hiring Program to March 31st, 2022, so businesses can hire the workers they need. We have a plan to help almost 160,000 small and medium-sized businesses adopt new technologies. We're going to invest in nationwide broadband to improve jobs and education opportunities. We improved the Canada Small Business Financing Program by an estimated $560 million, supporting approximately 2,900 additional small businesses. We will double the union training and innovative program to $50 million a year, targeting women, Indigenous people, newcomers, people with disabilities.
I pause. Thank you. Mr. Kaikkonen.
Thank you. Small and medium-sized business know very well what to do when given opportunity. I would try to make sure the government, certainly federal government, stays out of the way and finds the way to minimize any regulations that might be even right now hindering their operations. But talking about opportunities, I would actually start renegotiations with our trade partners, focusing on our Asian partners who are selling goods here at the ridiculous prices, using the labor that is nowhere near the way we are treating ours. And that, starting with the tariffs on them, and that would give opportunities for small business to actually start doing the products and making products and services here that are now done in Asia. Thank you.
Ms. Fosbrook.
Thank you, sir. So I agree that trade agreements, rather domestic or international, certainly play a part in this. But I also think that, fundamentally, if you're talking about economic development in any given community, you are talking about small business, predominantly small, medium-sized business. And given that we deemed a lot of them not essential, not exactly a huge vote of confidence for their business. So I think that first and foremost, we need to allow people to actually conduct business, not bog them down with bureaucracy, paperwork, regulations. And I think that if we were to take a view of, rather than giving them subsidies and loans and grants, maybe allow them to keep more of their money in the first place. And that might help them tremendously, I think. Thank you.
We're going to another area, economics, fiscal responsibility. How are you going to address the deficit and staggering debt in Canada? And we're going to start with Ms. Watson.
Oh, thank you. Canada entered COVID-19 with one of the best records in the G7, a AAA credit rating, the lowest debt to GDP ratio, one of the highest skilled workforces. All the elements that went into achieving that record prior to COVID are still in place. We can build back stronger. While some of the parties want to cut programs, to cut the deficit, that's just going to set Canada back. People have to come first in an economic recovery, so we need to get back to work. Our plan invests in people, innovation, and communities. The three biggest components are the plan to achieve $10 a day childcare, create a universal public health care system, including mental health, and have a plan to make home ownership a reality. I'd just like to end with a couple of quotes from the Toronto Star. The Conservative plan will cost more than $100 billion over the next decade, similar to what they're criticizing the Liberal Party for. And according to a former PBO staffer, says only the Liberal plan deserves good grades for overall fiscal credibility.
Mr. Ruff.
So I'd like to point out that first off, entering the pandemic, we were actually having negative growth rate and we weren't moving forward. So the current government was handed a windfall of money and sort of a balanced budget that they should have been saving up for the 4 years prior to the pandemic. But Canada's Conservatives got us out of the last recession, and so for those Canadians that are worried, they know who to vote for to get us out of it again. As we implement our jobs plan, we'll get Canadians back to work. We'll get the revenue needed to pay for the necessary services. We'll get unemployment down. We'll get those revenues into the government, and we'll also wind down the emergency spending in a responsible manner. Our plan for secure jobs and economic growth will reduce the deficit by almost 90% by repairing the economy, and we'll get this done within the next decade. And a crucial part of our plan is to provide new investments into research and development, high-speed internet access, tax measures such as a patent box. These will all have long-term benefits to the economy.
Thank you. Mr. Neudorf.
Our response to this boils down to the question, who's going to pay for it? You've heard a lot of policy proposals today, all of which will cost money. And yet, while my party has always asked the question, who's going to pay for it, we're the only ones with an answer. The wealthy are going to. Taxes have never been this low for the wealthy. We want to reverse the horrible tax cuts that have been given to the wealthiest Canadians at the expense of working Canadians. In May of this year, a wealth tax proposal supported by 82% of Canadians was presented to the floor. And every party, except the NDP, and of course my friends in the Green Party, voted against it. This was outrageous. Right now, we are paying the majority of taxes. We are losing hundreds of billions to tax havens, to loopholes, to systems designed to be unfair. So we know how we're going to pay for it, by taking that money from the wealthy and investing it in communities. For every $1 that the government spends on communities, we get 3 back. It's time for them to pay their fair share. How are you guys going to pay for it without taxing the rich?
Thank you. Ms. Fosbrook.
So I spoke with somebody recently, and they didn't know that originally, when income tax was proposed, that it was supposed to be temporary. A lot of people don't know that. I'm pretty sure that's by design. So we have all these discussions about, we're going to subsidize this, and we're going to pay for this, and we're going to take from the rich, and we're going to give to the poor, and it all sounds great. But look where it's got us. Like, we were headed for a financial cliff long before COVID. There's the sign again. So I'm going to cut to the chase, and I'm going to say, we have taxation by inflation. We have foreign aid with no reconciliation of what we got for our dollars. We need to take care of our budget here, first and foremost, and then perhaps we can venture outside to help others as much as we'd all love to. But we have a financial system that's broken.
Mr. Kaikkonen.
I think only natural and common sense, farm sense, down-to-earth thing to do is to start finding monies from already those budgetary items that are there. So I would start going through the government budget item by item and putting them through the test that I would call righteousness of God. If they don't pass the test, I would seek to eliminate them. One of the first things I would go after would be CBC radio, who costs that, or CBC broadcasting system that costs government about 1.2 billion a year. Private, notoriously, private industry can do a very good job running those broadcast systems. So I would propose to defund them and privatize them. And in that same fashion, I would go through other items. Yeah, thank you.
Ms. Lawrence.
This deficit question requires a bit of reframing. There's too much focus on how to get out of a deficit and how to claw back and cut back services to vulnerable people in our society, and telling them they're not worth it, not worth that spending. The Conservatives see these dollar amounts and they see a balanced budget as their primary goal, and will happily take those cuts, take those dollars back from the most vulnerable because they don't have loud voices. They're working several jobs, they're very busy, and they're trying to survive, and we hear their voice the least in our society, and it's much easier to respond to corporations that have the ability to communicate their needs. So main goal is a wealth tax to take that wealth and redistribute it in our society.
Thank you very much. We're moving to another area, and this concerns vaccine passports. Basically, we know that some provinces and territories have introduced them or are introducing, some haven't. But there's a line of thought that says this should be one national vaccine passport system instead of a variety of provincial and territorial systems. Do you support that kind of initiative? Ms. Fosbrook.
No, I don't. I don't support it. You just have to look down history lane and see where this could possibly go. So show me your paper society. It's very divisive, very discriminatory, and absolutely infringes on people's rights and freedoms. I don't think that this is even, we shouldn't be even contemplating this, is my opinion. And I don't even have time to read a quote from somebody that I had a recent conversation with, but I will say that characterizing this as the biggest human rights crisis in our country's history. Like, who do we think we are that we can tell anybody you can and cannot go somewhere? And if you think you're immune today because you're the privileged, don't count on it lasting.
Thank you. The next, Ms. Lawrence, vaccine passport.
I want to start by saying that many countries globally are not out of this pandemic, as they do not have access to vaccines, do not have the choice to say yes or no to healthcare that will save their lives from COVID-19, and or they have not been able to distribute the vaccine because of their vulnerable healthcare systems. In the past, vaccines have been required for travel into countries because outbreaks were very difficult to avoid. Some examples of these diseases and outbreaks are cholera, smallpox, and yellow fever. Some of the lowest access to vaccines right now are in Haiti, Congo, Syria, Somalia, Ethiopia, and Afghanistan, where the people are experiencing war, displacement, and on top of that, climate change and desertification. We need to be self-reflective when we see that in Canada we have a wonderful healthcare system. It could use improvements, but we need to reflect on our privilege and think about a way that we can protect each other.
Thank you. Mr. Kaikkonen, vaccine passports.
Completely abhorrible proposal. And I might add that it's completely out of the constitutional rights that gives every citizen to choose their way without interference from governments. So absolutely no passports, and the lockdown should end also immediately. Provinces that try to introduce the passport have to also should be dealing with the federal government, because they are also out of that constitutional lineup. And this is a serious thing. This can lead into very destructive and divisive society. Cannot be healthy. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Neudorf.
You ever try going to work without wearing your pants? We already have things we can and cannot do for the public safety of others. In my case, not wearing pants is considered for me technically a weapon. We have to have licenses to drive. And you can't drive when you're drunk, no matter how thirsty you were beforehand. We're facing a global pandemic. The last one of this nature killed 50 million people. The United States has experimented with taking no serious action to prevent its spread, and very soon their death rate will surpass their civil war. We are not in a position to put people's lives at risk. I understand people have concerns about the vaccines. I understand that some folks don't want to get it, but the reality is they cannot be put in positions where they could harm others and allow it to spread further. Yes, it is a difficult situation. Emergencies call for serious, decisive action. I am in favor of the passport, not because I like the idea, but because I think it is necessary to save lives.
Ms. Watson.
Thank you. I just want to remind everybody, healthcare is a provincial mandate by our Constitution. If all of the provinces and territories approach the federal government asking them to create a federal passport, then I would 100% support it. The fight against COVID isn't finished, and vaccinations is our best line of defense. It protects people that are vaccinated and those who can't get vaccinated, like our people with underlying conditions and our young children. It's no different from the childhood vaccinations that we all got in order to let us go to school. Because of those, people no longer die from diseases like smallpox and measles. All federal leaders finally got on the same page, and they announced support for vaccinations just last week. Over 80% of Canadians support and have received them. To finish this fight, we need to do everything in our power to keep public spaces and workplaces safe. Remember those yellow cards we all got when we were kids? How is this different? Just an adult version. We will partner with the provinces. Oops, there you go. Thank you.
Thanks. So I'll actually agree with my Liberal counterpart for the first part of her point. Ultimately, this is provincial jurisdiction going back to our Constitution, so it's up, and a Conservative government will always respect the Constitution and respect our provincial counterparts and what they want to come forward. And if they were to bring forward the idea that they all want to have one, we'll do our best, nationally. This is especially important, and we are committed to doing this for those Canadians that want to travel. And obviously, if you want to travel to a country that demands a double vaccination, we're going to make sure that those proof of vaccination, proof of certification is recognized in those countries to make it easy for Canadians to travel. But ultimately, I will encourage everybody to get vaccinated, but it is a personal health choice. And I have 3 of those yellow books that I can pull out of my backpack here from my 25 years in the military. I've likely got more vaccines than most of the people here in the room put together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Diane would like to say something at this juncture.
This actually ends the questions that were brought forward from our advocacy committees from the chambers. We're moving now into the section where we received questions from our community. And I just wanted you to know, due to time constraints, we received an awful lot of questions from the community, and we'll try and just pick the ones that we think are important. Yes, Ms. Vosbrook. Yes.
I would love to know all the questions that were asked, not because we're going to answer them, but I want to know what they are.
I can absolutely send those to you.
Thank
and
you
to
so
all
much.
of you at the end of
Every single one.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
There are, another 20. Some
30.
are repetitive and some are lengthy, but it's absolutely important.
Fascinating, too.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Transparency is important.
Yes.
So do I start with
And yeah, I'll start that one. Yes.
Okay, so another subject that has been introduced from the audience. What regulatory steps, if any, does your party propose to control the safe licensing and sale of firearms for hunters, farmers, and sport shooters? How would you limit access to powerful illegal weapons by criminals? And we're going to start with,
Mr. Ruff.
as it turns out, Mr. Ruff.
So, yeah, fascinating question, and something that I've been very frustrated with a lot of the misleading commentary that's been put out by the current government. Canada already has some of the most stringent regulatory firearms legislation in the world. The problem with gun crime in this country is not to do with our law-abiding hunters, sport shooters, and farmers. It's to do with gangs, crime, drugs, and poverty. I've been speaking up in the House of Commons, I think, 8 times on this. I've asked for the current government to provide any data, any evidence that any of the measures that they've put in, or even define what they refer to as assault weapons, which have been banned since 1977, military-style assault rifles. Out of the 1,500 firearms banned, I couldn't get Minister Blair, to acknowledge any of them were designed for military use anywhere in the world.
Thank you. Ms. Watson.
Sure.
That's what makes it fun.
That's what makes it fun. So the Liberals never had any desire to target law-abiding gun owners, not farmers, not sportsmen, not hunters. The Liberals have taken action to protect the lives of those that are so often lost to large caliber assault and semi-automatic weapons. We never had a Montreal shooting with somebody that went in with a single-shot .22. That's not what took those women's lives. We didn't have people lost at the different other shootings with those kind of guns as well. Those are guns made to put food on the table. Those are guns made to protect your farm from the coyote that's threatening your crop. What we're trying to protect is the people of this country. And yes, we do have those assault weapons banned. Again, not targeting hobbyists. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Neudorf.
This is a complex issue. I am a target shooter. I'm a proud member of the target shooting community. And our policy, the NDP, is that we are concerned about illegal firearms coming over the border. We share a border with one of the most reckless manufacturers and distributors of firearms in the world. And it is a very easy thing to smuggle those guns into Canada and sell them illegally. And that is where the RCMP have estimated 50 to 75% of all firearms in any kind of criminal activity, from self-harm to violence. That's where they're coming from. And the NDP wants to strengthen our borders to prevent those arms from getting into this country. We also want to get guns off the streets by giving young people an opportunity to avoid the criminal lifestyle. Like I've been saying over and over, we have let this generation down. We need subsidies to give them opportunities to explore high skills majors, to explore other opportunities outside of criminality, to have early intervention programs in poor communities. That's how we tackle the issue. No more illegal guns.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good way to end. Ms. Fosbrook.
Can I ask you to repeat the question? Because I'm not sure I understood exactly where you were going with that.
Of course. And this, as I said, came from others. What regulatory steps, if any, does your party propose to control the sale, and licensing of firearms used by farmers, hunters, and sport shooters? How would you limit access to powerful, illegal weapons by criminals?
Okay, so how would you limit control of powerful illegal weapons? Okay, right there, if it's illegal, it's illegal, right? Moving from that point, I have not traditionally been a gun lover, but I've certainly come to recognize that there's a reason why certain individuals in certain landscapes, rural and whatnot, they need to keep these things handy. By the same token, I certainly understand that there's the certain demographic who recognizes that if they're not able to defend themselves and their family, then that might be a problem. So, whether you're looking to limit the rights of law-abiding gun owners, or you're in favor of defunding the police, or really don't care that our military is being diminished, all of these things have a common theme, and that is that we should be able to protect ourselves and not be solely reliant on the government, which is increasingly unreliable in a great number of respects.
Thank you. Ms. Lawrence.
My position is to control and ban the use of semi-automatic guns and the type that are used in mass shootings through North America. These policies are to follow other Commonwealth countries in banning these assault-style weapons. There's no reason to have these guns in our society, and even if they're owned by law-abiding citizens, they're available just because they're in their homes and around our communities. And it's a huge tragedy to have mass shootings, and I hope that we can come together, gun owners or not gun owners, and recognize that we don't want shootings at schools and elementary schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kaikkonen, gun control.
Thank you. I certainly would not add any more gun controls. Guns go with democratic free societies. Certainly in the farming areas, we need guns. I have needed guns many times. A rabid fox or animal who is suffering from horrible accident just cannot be kept suffering longer. Many situations. So I believe current regulations are more than enough, and law-abiding citizens also need to have guns because criminals certainly have them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on to another question that was submitted to us. Will your party be making modifications to the capital gains tax credits to income and/or property sales? If they will be made, what will they be? So, and it's going to start with you, Ms. Fosbrook, in terms of, I'll repeat it. Will your party be making modifications to the capital gains tax credits to income and/or property sales? If they will be made, what will they be?
It must be getting late at night, because I guess I would just say that,
It is getting late.
yeah, not in favor of capital gains tax is my answer.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kaikkonen, what do you think about changes, or do you suggest any to capital gains or property sales taxes?
I would not tamper with that. It's currently one of the ways that the normal person can actually find capital when they sell the house. It is one of those hopeful places where the normal person can rise above and receive the rewards of his labor. No changes, in my opinion, at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lawrence?
A capital gains tax is just one of the ways that we can control the housing crisis. So there are other options in this toolbox, but the capital gains tax that the Green Party would propose is something that would be phased in over a period, so you have a time to get used to these new rules. And the other stipulation is that it is only effective in a period within 4 or 5 years. So if you have owned your house for 30 years, 10 years, you can still gain that income from selling your home. And this is just to discourage buyers and sellers that are flipping houses and kind of draw down the market, because those investments are what's causing this crisis. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Newdorf?
Well, there's a couple of approaches we want to take with the capital gains tax. First, I want to focus on new buyers. We want to lower the taxes on new home buyers, first-time home buyers, to actually give the 75% of millennials who see owning a house as a pipe dream, and the 40% that have just outright given up on it entirely, a chance to actually buy homes. We also want to increase capital gains for foreign speculation. One of the reasons that homes are rapidly increasing in prices so much is because foreign speculation is buying them well above housing market and then using them to jack up the rent. So you have two problems at one. It's driving up the cost of houses, and it's also driving up the cost of rent. We want to force these people out. Our party's starting with 20%. I say let's go higher. And as a member of caucus, I intend to push that significantly higher than 20%. But it's a good point to start on. Finally, I want to point out that when it comes to capital gains, one of the problems in our taxation system is capital gains is taxed far less than income. And what this results in is more of these loopholes made by the other parties, and we want to close it. Capital, same as income.
Thank you. Mr. Ruff?
I'll make this pretty clear. A conservative government will never put capital gains tax on your principal residence, unlike the Liberal Party.
Ms. Watson?
Yes, thank you. I'm not sure where Mr. Ruff is getting his information, but the Liberal Party has no intention of changing the capital gains on primary residences. We will, however, increase the capital gains on speculation and foreign property and in short-term flips. We're going to do that because we want to control skyrocketing house values. We want to help home buyers get in. And like my NDP colleague, we want to improve or lower the rent rates for those people that are struggling with it right now. That applies to our seniors. That applies to people who are in low-income situations. We need to be able to have some homes for them. There's far too many properties that are vacant right now, multiple properties that belong to the same individual. They're not accessible, and they're just sitting there hurting the rest of the economy.
Thank you. Next question area with respect to seniors and low-income seniors. We're starting with Mr. Kaikkonen. What will you do? It says, what will your party do? What will you do to help low-income seniors and people trying to live on CPP disability? We live well below the poverty line, this person says. What will you do to help low-income seniors and people trying to live on CPP disability? We live well below the poverty line. Mr. Kaikkonen.
Thank you. That is a very serious matter going on in this nation, and I heard that from going door to door. It's the burning question in many lives. So I believe that is the area where we should channel some of the monies that come from the savings, from cutting down some of the unnecessary budgetary items. We would channel those monies to make sure that the senior citizens, veterans, disabled, family income would be around 2 persons in a family, 25,000, and single at least 18,000. And they should be subsidized and made sure that they are taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lawrence.
The main impact for seniors is in our policies is proposing a guaranteed livable income. The issue of affordability for seniors also relates to the fact that many seniors don't own their own homes. So there's that parallel to the housing crisis and providing affordable rental units that are safe. And the Green Party also proposes pharmacare, so help with medications, funding medications, and dental care for low-income families. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Ruff.
We have a few ideas here that we're proposing. We're going to make it easier for seniors to stay in their own home by amending the home accessibility tax credit by increasing the limit from $10,000 per dwelling to $10,000 per person. We're going to allow seniors or their caregivers, including their children, to claim the medical expense tax credit for home care instead of only allowing them to claim that if they live in a group home. We're going to make work pay for our seniors. For those seniors that still want to try to work, we're going to double the Canada Workers Benefit up to $2,800 for individuals or $5,000 for family, and pay it as a quarterly direct deposit rather than a tax refund at the end of the year. We're going to make sure the pensions are protected. So obviously not direct to the question with the CPP, but for those seniors that do have some pension with their previous employment. And on the disability side of the house, we're going to double the disability supplement in the Canada's worker benefit. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Neudorf.
There's a lot of proposals we have, but it all starts with not-for-profit long-term care. We cannot help seniors in our community if we are looking at them as systems of profit. This has to end. Long-term care needs to be universal, not-for-profit. And this isn't just long-term care. This is home care as well. Not all seniors need to be in long-term care facilities, and they have the right to live their last years with dignity in their homes if possible. And we have no subsidies for home care. We need home care and long-term to be not-for-profit. We also want to expand accessibility to social support programs, to income support grant programs for seniors with the goal of bringing UBI. Our goal is to make it so that everyone can access it, and we're going to do it soon, especially if I'm in caucus. Universal pharmacare and dental care are part of this as well. But we also want to increase CPP and GIS should not be a way for the government to claw back taxes like CERB. People are already struggling enough. That's what we want to do.
Thank you. Ms. Watson.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. So the Liberals increased OAS by 10% in 2021. We have a one-time payment of $500 in August to people that were over 75, and we're going to increase OAS again by another 20% in 2022. GISs will also be increased. So we are trying to bring up the average income of the senior who's trying to live on just those alone. I would like to see, and the government is, or the Liberal government, the Liberal Party as well, to add more health care to universal health, including prescriptions, hearing, and eyes. We're working hard to increase the number of affordable units so that we can have a place for the seniors to live on what they can afford to pay. We're going to reduce taxes for seniors who still want to continue to work, and we want to keep seniors in their homes longer by adding home care, by hiring more PSWs, and by paying them more. Thank you.
Ms. Fosbrook.
Thank you.
So again, the contrast of subsidy, 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 and then we're going to somehow reconcile it later. You know, if we took a longer term approach and again, didn't tax people so extremely to account for an oversized, bloated government, maybe people would have more prosperity throughout their life so that they could enjoy more financial independence in their golden years. I would say that, again, that taxation by inflation is, again, a factor. So if you are increasing the subsidy to compensate for the inflation, you're never really solving the problem. And so, again, there's some fundamentals that really need to get addressed rather than just trying to solve the problem short term with a subsidy.
Thank you. We've now come to the end of the questions, and to people listening in the audience who submitted questions that weren't asked, I apologize. The answers we had to the questions we had touch on some of the areas that you expressed, and had we more time, we would have gotten to them, but thank you for submitting them. Time flies when you're having fun. We're now going to have the final statements, 90 seconds each, please, for each candidate. We're going in the reverse order of the way we started, so that means we start with Ms. Watson. 90 seconds, thank you.
Thank you again for the opportunity, and to all those that are watching this evening, thank you for your questions. The past 18 months have been incredibly challenging and have polarized this country. While the world responded to the pandemic, family members, friends, and neighbors took opposing stances on masks, testing, vaccinations, and shutdowns. People turned on each other at a time when we needed to stand together. We saw parts of our healthcare system fail and parts of it rise to the challenge. The pandemic took a significant toll on healthcare workers, and we need to support them now. It's also been a challenge for government, responding quickly, protecting health and individual rights. The Liberal Party had people's backs through the pandemic, and we will have them in the future. A re-elected Liberal government will finish the fight against COVID, get people back to work, fight climate change, and grow the economy. And rural Canada must not be left out of this future. Our agricultural areas provide significant carbon refuge, and our region is poised to lead the way in green energy. My colleague, Mr. Ruff, told you about hydrogen optimized, and that's just an extraordinary story of success. I'm committed to ensuring quality health care for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound, fighting climate change, working with our Indigenous neighbours and friends on reconciliation and getting Canadians back to work. And please, on Election Day, remember, Watson, last name on the ballot, first in your heart.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ruff.
Well, again, thanks to the Chambers for hosting tonight. Thanks for all the listeners out there. This is important just to be part of the democratic process and get a chance for everybody to listen to the different aspects we have, the different platforms we're putting forward. The Conservative Party put forth our platform, first time, I think, in the history of the country on day one of the election where our whole platform was released. Canada's Recovery Plan, 163 pages long. There is a plan to recover the 1 million jobs, to get the deficit back under control, reintroduce accountability in Ottawa, anti-corruption laws so that politicians that are breaking the ethics laws aren't getting away with $200 fines, but up to $50,000 fines. Taking care of Canadians' health. We're going to have historic health care transfers. We're going to double the current Liberal 3% annual increase to 6%, a total of $60 billion over the next decade. We're going to make sure we're prepared for a future pandemic by making sure we have domestic capacity in vaccines and other critical infrastructure. And finally, we're going to put that support into mental health. It's been the greatest privilege to be your elected member for the last 2 years. I am asking all voters in Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound to give me that honor once again. I will continue to stand up for rural Canadians, our farmers, our veterans, our military, our seniors, and every single person in Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound, whether you vote for me or not. But please vote Rough on the 20th of September.
Thank you. Mr. Newdorf.
Folks, we're facing a lot of crises. A climate crisis, affordable housing crisis, rampant inequality. And these crises existed far before COVID-19. They've simply exposed them. But where people see crisis, I see opportunity. I see the chance to revitalize our economy with 1 million new high-paying jobs, to bring manufacturing back to Canada by investing subsidies in manufacturing, to invest in our agricultural production to make it green, to make it safe, to create hundreds of thousands of new jobs in green energy production to not only save the environment, but to save our economy. I believe that if we invest in people, that is how we secure our economic future, our economic stability, all of it. But I believe it begins with investing in people, not in the wealthy. 82% of Canadians called for a wealth tax, and the parties joined hands against it. The point was made before that this election was to ask Canadians what they think. What we think is that the wealthy should be paying their fair share, that we should be investing in small communities, and that we should bring this money back to Canadians. Universal pharma care, universal health care, universal child care, universal long-term care, equality, fairness in the taxation system, and an economic and environmental future for our children. We can do it if we come together and we make our voices heard. Vote Christopher Newdorf in this election for the New Democratic Party. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lawrence.
Thank you for this opportunity to share the beautiful, incredible policies that the Green Party has that are just equitable responses to the crisis we have. The Green Party has really provided, to me, a response to the linked challenges of reconciliation with Indigenous people, climate stability, economic and social justice, and forming a better democracy. I'm passionate about the Green Party's promises because they are honest and realistic ways of managing our economy and our livelihoods in a future with extreme weather events, vulnerable food systems, and the offense of having the rich profit off of our crises. I would like to be the MP for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound, not only because I honestly represent the issue of environmental degradation, but because I want to advocate for an equitable response to climate change and the challenges to social, economic justice that we'll face in the coming 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kaikkonen.
Thank you. I also like to thank you, many of the folks that I have met during this campaign. They have been so gracious, even though I sometimes knock while they are eating. And thank you for your sharing your concerns. And I have very much been wiser and instructed of that. If trusted with this high office and honor, I would start restoring those principles of godliness in this country, principles of faith, freedom, family, liberty and opportunity, and a common sense finance that is like straight from the farm. If you don't have the money, don't spend it. So I asked this mandate to start changing things back into those basic foundations that have really blessed this country massively, that right now we have something to share. And let's go back to that foundations or principles of Bible that sets us free and gives us so much hope and opportunity. Thank you. God bless you all.
Thank you. Ms. Fosbrook.
Thank you. So I agree that with Mr. Kaikkonen that freedom is fundamental. And I think that any discussion that precludes, doesn't give justice to the importance of freedom is nothing but lip service, quite frankly. People, aside from those who are truly invalid, I don't believe people want to be dependent. I think they want to be independent. They want to prosper. And they can't do that without freedom. So any measures to restrict people's freedom, whether it's freedom of speech, freedom of information, freedom to question, freedom to challenge, all of these things are at risk right now. And they are getting worse by the day. I want to revisit parental rights. It's outrageous, absolutely outrageous. The parents have to be concerned that their children are going to be coerced into getting a jab while they're at school, and the parents don't even know about it. I mean, I could go on and on. Our financial system is broken. It has been questionable since its inception, and people don't know history. I recommend that you do some history. A vote for the People's Party of Canada is a vote for a party that, in Maxime Bernier's own words, is doing things differently. If we always do what we always did, we're always going to get what we always got. And how you loving that?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, my turn to say thank you, as I did at the start. On behalf of the Meaford Chamber of Commerce, the Grey Highlands Chamber of Commerce, the Owen Sound and District Chamber of Commerce, first, thank you to each of you, as I said, for your candidacy, for your participation. We know the weather was challenging tonight, an extra challenge. I'm sure if you wrote books, you could tell all the things in the campaign that are challenging. Thank you through you to your volunteers that you support. Thank you to the audience. And I, as a person, would like to say, I'm speaking on behalf of the chambers, but I'd like to thank the chambers, because coming together, collaborating, and bringing you all together is what democracy is all about. So special thanks, and it's been a great discussion. Good luck to all of you.
Thanks very much. Thank you all.
benefit the McLaren Arts Center's visual arts programs through your support here tonight. My name is Melissa. This is Rogers TV, and until next Tuesday, fingers crossed, have a great week and good night.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.